So tell me, what does an overly plastic D-list reality TV drama queen actress and the board game Scythe have in common? Well, they're both pretty to look at, both idolize the richest in the room, and both get endless expansions. But it's not hard to figure out that if you go even slightly beneath the surface, things get repulsive fast. Scythe is an economic engine building game set in the immediate aftermath of World War I, and looks like every dieselpunk gaming dream I've ever had all come true. But everything is definitely not how it appears. From the rulebook full of blunders, a back of the box riddled with inconsistencies, and a con of a map of epic proportion. Also, there's more, which begs the question, how? Not how did this game get to production, but how is this still in production? Players, game creators, board game hackers. In this video, you'll see absolutely every horrifying deception, game blunder, and whoopsie baked into this game right here. How these mess-ups are unwittingly hidden, and after revealing it all, we answer the question, is this game still worth playing? Because there's game testers, and then there's me, Pones Jones, a master board game hacker. My team and I play, hack, and unlock a game's true potential. And Scythe's potential has been hidden from every newcomer since launch. If only they had come to us before hitting the big red button. Hold up, good and bad findings are highlighted with these markers, which are tallied by category and then totaled at the end of the video. It's not my intent, but if these revelations changed your feelings about Scythe, please timestamp when in the video that change happened for you, and tell me why. The year, early 1920. The setting, the lands around a deactivated mech factory in the far east of Europe. And you, playing as one of the 5 factions, eager to destroy your rivals, all in pursuit of an excessively noble cause. Money! That's right. In order to win Scythe, you've got to be the richest faction. After cashing out all of your accomplishments, immediately following a faction placing all 6 of their objective stars. Now that you know what you're chasing, well, how do you even get there? With these. Each player draws a random, unique faction and player/economy mat, then sets out their starting placements, and hits go. It takes about 30 to 35 rounds to complete a game of Scythe, but if you're a newbie, it may take your entire life, because you'll keep stopping to stare at the excessively pretty artwork, like the box lid, or the back of the box. A back that is, quite frankly, the strangest debacle of this entire game, but you won't be able to appreciate any of that frothy mess until we first discuss the map and all of these. Woo! The unintended tension. See, the camera cut the video right there. What you actually need an understanding of is the map and all the game pieces. One of my favorite parts of a board game, the map. But unfolding this one for the first time feels precarious, stressful, and impossible to figure out. But when you finally get it unfolded, half the board is missing. That took me a hot minute to realize the complete board lives on the other side. Just look at that gorgeous map. The matte texture, the range of colors and detail, that gets utterly hijacked by these massive red outlined territories. They're the first and only thing grabbing your attention. Makes the board feel very crowded, and they're completely unnecessary. Those territories are tunnels to each other, and so a modest marker would have sufficed. A modest marker like the ones depicting territory resources, except for this one that blends into the background a little too easily. But if we look to the outside of the board, you see card deck placeholders and trackers. Trackers like this one, displaying a faction's current combat power reserves, and for some reason has a pink highlighted mark on 7. My best guess, a reminder that a combat dial maxes out at 7 power. Either way, it's never explained in the rules. But what is explained in the rules are these home base starting locations for 2 factions.
Actually, as we'll discuss later, they built a portion of the game around these 2 factions. 2 factions that you can't find anywhere in the box.
Don't be silly and naive. Those 2 factions are currently sitting safe and sound on the shelf of your favorite game store, ready for that obligatory expansion purchase. And it all starts with the back of the board, the one everyone unfolds and instantly freaks out because half of it's missing. Well, yes, a large blown up version of the map is freaking epic. You get to enjoy the colors and more detail, not to mention the extra room. And if you just give it a glance, you'd totally be forgiven for feeling like they couldn't fit the 30% larger map in the original box. But where is the slice of missing blown up map anyways? Well, it's also sitting at your fave game store. But there's a different feeling you get when you whip out a measuring tape and math some crunches. Conned. because I did all of the maths and the Venn diagrams. You can 100% add the last blown up section of the map and it'll fit perfectly into this original box. So from my perspective, these two built-in money grab expansions are both utterly brilliant and profoundly slimy. Each faction sports 3 of the same unit types: leaders/characters, mechs, and workers. I think the red mech looks savage, with its massive shoulder-mounted cannons and scythe-like talons. I picture it firing off a couple of its salvos and then clawing its way through an enemy army. The details on these minis doesn't go unnoticed, and if you look closer at those workers, they're all unique. I know a bit about game manufacturing, and they didn't have to do this. They could have saved some cash by standardizing the worker template across all factions, and nobody would have said boo. But it's not just the details in the minis, workers, it's also on the economy mats. Split into 2 action areas, top and bottom, each mat has a differing matchup between the 2 areas. But that's not all. Each showcase a different background image and starting bonuses, number of objectives, popularity, and coins. But if you look closer, we find even more. The eco-mats are double layered, so your tokens are seated inside a recessed slot. Finally, the entire game's progress doesn't explode the second your sleeve brushes the mat. But what about those wood tokens? Well, you have upgrade/tech cubes, achievement stars, enlistment cylinders, tracker markers, a mine entrance, an armory, a mill, and a monument. All factions brandish the same ones. But there's something else. 10 things, to be exact, that the makers of Scythe went up and beyond with. Which, by the way, I kinda rarely see when testing games. And that is extra pieces. An extra spinner center punch, 8 extra coins, and 2 mini containers. All of which are not listed here under the box contents. Love it. You're staring at what every new player stares at before purchasing Scythe. 12 game mess-ups. 12 goofs that are beyond baffling, etched directly onto the back of the box, with only one far-flung conclusion explaining them all. And it's definitely not what you think. Starting with these extremely tiny achievement stars, the deck of objective cards is missing from the game. The monument tokens are different than displayed. The $1 coin's center square is not punched out. The $5 coin is not red, and the Black Faction's economy mat states it starts with 5 coins. And speaking of economy mats, why do all these mats have the same illustrations on them, just with different brightnesses? It feels like the entire back of this box is an afterthought, but it's almost worse than that. It's just screen caps from an outdated, almost beta release of Scythe that was being tested on a digital board gaming platform back in 2015. And don't get me wrong, digital beta versions of a game makes complete sense, especially if you're doing a Kickstarter. But come on, people. How many years have you had to get an actual real-life error-free image of your physical game on the back of the actual physical game box? We all know that one hated board game with clunky mechanics, terrible flow, and hollow victories. But how does the game end up like that anyways? Simple. Lack of thorough testing. Here's a list of all the game testers who toiled for our benefit. Love the recognition here, and kudos to them. The game is well-rounded and decently exploit-resistant, but they missed something. Something as equally important as the gameplay itself. And that's where my expertise come in. The game as a whole, experienced by a new player. Exhibit A diagram to return everything back to the box. A godsend. Hard to even count how many times I've tested a game to find it won't fit back in the box. The only problem, if you actually try to follow the diagram, it breaks. There's an extra insert inside, and this doesn't really make any sense anymore. So, is this like some sort of expansion, or is this another outdated image? Speaking of storage, on first opening, each faction's wooden tokens are separated into 4 tiny baggies, with only a few in each. Yeah, it's wild. I tried returning all the pieces to their allocated baggies for the first few games, and then said, F it. It's dysfunctional and painful. All the tokens for a faction get fated into just being shoved into a large baggie and then dumped into the box. They do give you extra baggies, but to be honest, you don't get enough of the big ones. The enticing lid, detailed map, the minis, all create an incredibly polished game atmosphere, and my imagination loves it. Also adding to the feel, these single-use encounter locations and cards that let you interact with the unseen local populations. Share some good news from home with the travelers. Gain $2 in 1 popularity. Trade for a cow and eat steak for dinner. Pay $2 to gain 4 food. Convince the soldiers that the patterns on the cow contain coded maps from the enemy. Pay 2 popularity to gain 2 combat cards and 3 power. Bang on. Also, all resources gained from worker production or these encounter cards are placed directly on the board, and not directly deposited into a player's imaginary coffer, so other factions can still snipe them from the board on their turn. Excellent. And speaking of turns, there's a top and bottom action to each turn, so by the time you've made it to the bottom of your chosen ecomat section, the rules encourage the next player to get started on their turn. Turn overlaps? Yes, queen! But pay attention, because if you've recruited for a bottom action on your ecomat, and a player on either side of you does that same bottom action, then you get a bonus. This, plus encouraging players to make alliances and bribe each other, even during combat, keeps everyone off of their dreaded doom scrollers, as they're at least slightly engaged during other players' turns. Speaking of other players, the strats you use during a 2-player game ain't gonna work with higher player counts, which further adds to the game's replay value. It feels crushing, the amount of info you have to process to even half consider a turn successful. Thus, the game can run long, 1 to 3 hours longer than the box proclaims. But I think some quality of life improvements could combat this, like move the description of the unlockable mech abilities to behind the mech's storage location on the faction mat. That way, I don't have to constantly lift them to read what mech abilities I'm trying to plan my turns around. Also, smaller, easily forgotten rules should have reminders printed around the game. Example, on the combat dials. To draw a card if you've dialed at least 1 during combat. And reminders on the economy mats of the various buildings' abilities. I shouldn't have to memorize them. This lid, though? It's striking. Gives the feel of resource collection with a backdrop chorus of mass mech battles. And then when you actually play the game, it's anything but that. I think with everyone's predictions of what's under the lid, it can feel a bit like a letdown. You know what else can feel a bit like a letdown? The ending of this game. Enemy faction progress is somewhat hard to track, so the ending of the game can feel like an abrupt, spontaneous decapitation. And since the game ends instantly with a faction's placement of its 6th star, there's often many players who feel shorted as they don't get to play out their final turn. Because after every move, you hear,
"I hate this game,"
from all the other players, as every decision is a life-changing, paralyzing one, where every wrong step is definitely punished. But it's nice to see that this game realizes what type of mental state it places its new players in, like on page 28, that tell you to pause and add up who's winning so that new players can see where they're at. Nevertheless, if you're sick of other players, or it's impossible to get a game night together, you can simply hit up Scythe's comprehensive solo mode, although it's a whole nother rulebook thick of instructions. There's a few different types of game players. Those who avoid the rules at all costs, that's definitely my girl. Those who will lightly breeze through the rules to get the gist. And the last ones, like me, who jump headfirst and lap it all up. I'll admit, these rules look pretty damn good. And I really enjoyed the designer's comment bubbles sprinkled throughout, although I would have loved to see more behind the game info in them. However, placing the winning conditions on the front cover of the rulebook, sweet Susie. But even with my predisposition to rule fondling, there's a few glaring problems here. The pages are straight up too glossy. They look crisp, but it's almost impossible to read anything due to the glare. I can only get to page 16 before running out of fondling steam. I'm expected to blindly mentally sculpt this game into existence without ever witnessing a full view of what to expect. Here's an example. The rulebook starts out, "Hello, it's 1920. Here's your goal. This is what's in the box." And then it hits you with this. And it hits you way too early. Like, I don't even know what's happening, and you're trying to describe the ins and outs of commodity transactions. Bunch of psychos. It's like assembling a puzzle face down with the box picture on fire in the corner of the room. It's exhausting. Oh, and the rulebook needs a ledger page of all of the symbols you see everywhere in this game. That alone would have solved half of my struggles. Okay, so before I get to the big climax, we're gonna quickly rifle through the rest of this rulebook, marking off all of its boo-boos.
And to add insult to injury,
Page 4. The paragraph under spend resources from any territories you control is a wordy mess. And in the example pic, it's hard to actually see the resources depicted. Page 6. Combat cards. Yellow.
the paragraph is oddly worded.
The example image at the bottom should be bigger, highlighting the faction symbols. Page 7. Bottom example image. The red worker blends into the red town. Page 8. 3 of the 5 arrows are supposed to be pointing out multiple instances of what the text is explaining, but aren't. It's confusing. Furthermore, the buildings and workers need a side image when being referenced, as they look shapeless and in some spots exactly like a wooden cube. The overall concept of the economy mats early on in the rules was completely lost on me.
Wait a second. I guarantee you, I'm not the only one who suffered like this.
So, page 10 definitely needs a rework. I feel like the page is structured backwards and requires more emphasis on the difference between top and bottom actions. Also, more clarity around how much each action costs and what you get from them. Page 14, under upgrade, doesn't tell you that wooden tech cubes block rewards or costs they are sitting on. Instead, they leave me to assume it.
So, remember local encounters where your leader talks to the unseen local populations on the board?
I spent the first half of the rulebook thinking that local encounters were a second type of combat, as they're referenced a number of times at the beginning of the rulebook, but are only finally given context all the way on page 17. Page 18, the mill's description is fairly confusing.
Page 20, under player order,
It needs rewording. Sounds like you get to change the entire game's play turn order halfway through. Page 22 needs the words combat cards added to the chart title.
Page 29, under every 2 resources controlled, it's a wordy, frothy beast of a paragraph.
We've finally arrived. Brace yourself, because you can't unsee the wreckage I'm about to show you. And it all starts with these two. Polania and Crimea. 2 factions that are more OP the fewer friends you invite to game night. Polania's homelands are garbage, so they're dependent on their lake-to-lake teleportation ability, and a buff to score twice per encounter card. Crimea can teleport to any inactive faction's home base or their own. These 2 factions' strategy is to backdoor the map, sniping resource-rich territories and snagging as many encounter cards as possible. Plain out, especially if you bought the expansion, the more players you add, the more these 2 are going to get scuttled out of existence. Now we answer the questions: how many distinguished game finds and complete blunders did we unveil in Scythe? And is this game still worth playing? For the distinguished finds in this mech-filled Euro game Scythe, we got, drumroll please, 17 spectacular finds.
Yeah, I'd say that's an accomplishment.
And for the total absolute boo-boos revealed in Scythe over here, we have
50, which is way more than I thought this game would have, and also stroopwafels. Honestly, I thought this game would have like 20-ish. I was actually a little intimidated when I first decided I was going to hack it, because I thought it'd be a solid buttoned-up experience.
So now the question, is this still worth playing? In short, yes. This game's engine is very large, and we just chiseled around the edges a little bit. Think Catan meets Terraforming Mars with a seasoning of mechs. I'm very confident in saying that if you're down for brain tickling and future strategizing with very little player interaction, you'll enjoy this one. But our totals are missing something. Something so overpowered and crazy, our tally numbers are a complete lie. Because in this next video, I walk you through line upon line of exploits, turning one faction almost godlike, and there's only one way to define it. You've been playing Scythe wrong this entire time.